Good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to this evening's meeting of Scrutiny Committee. The time is 6:30 on Wednesday, the 7th of September. And for those listening and watching, my name is Councillor Caroline Brooke and I'm Chair of the committee this evening. I have a few housekeeping points to make before we begin. I'd like to advise that the open parts of the meeting are being audio recorded and live streamed from the Council's website. In addition, a video recording of the meeting is being made and will be publicly available shortly afterwards. For those in the room, can I remind you to speak clearly and remember to have your microphone close when speaking. It's particularly important in light of the email we received yesterday where there's some issues if we don't speak directly into the microphone in picking up the audio. For any members online, please can I ask that you mute your microphone and turn your camera off until you're asked to speak. And please can everyone ensure that mobile phones and other electronic devices are on silent or switched off entirely. For those of us in the room, in the unlikely event that there's necessity to evacuate or a fire alarm, the exits are clearly marked and we should gather in Abbey Gardens, and please do not use the lift. So turning to the agenda, Matthew, do we have any apologies this evening?
Good evening, Chair members. Just one apology from Councillor Westwood, who's been replaced by Councillor Rutter this evening. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Matthew. Do we have any declarations of interest? No. Thank you for your stepping in, Councillor Rutter, this evening. So this evening, I'm not going to put it in this section under Chairperson's announcement. I will bring it up at the end about our Scrutiny and LPAG meeting because that's going to be a big one on the 22nd of September, so I shall discuss it more under that. So coming on to item 4, meetings of the meeting of the 13th of July 2022. Have we all read those and agree that they are true and accurate representation? Agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Okay, item number 5. Do we have any public participation this evening, Matthew?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, no members of the public registered to speak, although we are joined by Lynn Mellish from TACT.
Good evening, Lynn. Thank you for joining us this evening. So on to item 5 of the Mental Health Matters Task and Finish Group feedback. So I've given brief verbal updates as we've had each of the meetings on the mental health group. And I'd just like to add again that overall we are really impressed with everything that the Council has done to help support the mental health agenda, both internally with employees and staff and externally with our housing customers. But I'd just like to pass over to Ms. Kirkman because this evening she has pulled together the report with the recommendations and the summary. Ms. Kirkman.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. The Mental Health Matters Task and Finish Group had Councillors Kern, Councillor Reid, Councillor Edwards, Councillor Gordon-Smith and Councillor Brooke was in the chair for those 3 sessions. We've provided the notes in tonight's paper of those 3 sessions, and there was one recommendation in respect of there being widely available training for staff in respect of mental health matters so that every customer contact that we have we can identify where there may be mental health issues at hand. That recommendation was accepted by our Executive Leadership Board and will be part of our corporate training provision for this year. It's just being considered how best to roll that sort of training out. And a kind of a live update, it was only as recently as Friday the 2nd of September that our latest round of mental health training has gone out to all staff, and that's our suicide awareness training. So that went out to staff last Friday. Nothing really further to add, Chair, apart from our thanks to those councillors involved and for your kind comments to date in respect of those.
Thank you, Ms. Kirkman. Does anybody have any questions or Councillor Cook?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to ask, if I may, Officer Kirkman, regarding the information that went out, you say, I think, last Friday. Can I ask how that was delivered to staff? Was it by some form of social media through their laptops, their iPads? Was it a letter they received? And is that a survey they complete, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cook. Let me just see if the email's open, because I checked it earlier. It was an email that went to all staff. It's an offering a save the date to hear a panel of experts talk about their experiences of suicide and discuss what help is available to those who need it. And that workshop was for colleagues across Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. There's a link to join the meeting. A lot of this, the provision of training is now done online, which means staff are more readily available to attend those. We've seen a huge leap in attendance of online training across the board. And there is also at the bottom of that further help and support staff in respect of referrals to Samaritans, to the charity Shout, to the Southern Health NHS Help Crisis Line, speaking to a loved one, friend or colleague, or speak to one of our mental health first aiders, and a link to all their contact details. That was the email that went out last Friday.
Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chair. So the information went out on Friday to all staff, you say. Can I ask then what time, is there a time span that these particular people have to get back to you or anyone that has forwarded this email out? Thank you.
No, they can just join. There's a click to join the meeting in that email, Councillor Cook. But they don't need to sign up or register. They can simply join that meeting to hear from that panel of experts.
Thank you, Chair. So the meeting that's going to happen, this is all going to be done via Teams. That they're not going to be able to come into a room and maybe talk face to face with somebody about that, if I may ask. Thank you.
Yeah, so this is suicide awareness training. This isn't support for someone with suicidal thoughts. So this is training for any member of staff. It doesn't have to be a manager. And that is training that is offered. So it is an online training provision for this one. But at the bottom of that email, Councillor Cook, people are referred and signposted to other areas for help if they have been affected by suicide. And just a reminder about the people out there that can help.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to commend the work of the group. It's a terribly important issue, and I'm pleased that corporate training is currently being looked at and delivered and encouraged for people to take part in. Could I just ask, in terms of staff, I know that we're having quite a trouble at the moment with the retention and recruitment of staff, and actually the way that people work, flexible working, and an assumption in favour of flexible working rather than fixed hours and so on, and the flexibility about where you work, working from home as well as the office and so on, is terribly important to support people's mental health. And I just wanted to ask to what extent that is being taken into consideration. It's not in the recommendations, and I just wondered what our policy is on that at the moment, and whether this consideration of the importance of supporting our staff's mental health might influence future decisions on that sort of. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rutter. I'm happy to try and help with that one. What I would say is you've got the two ends of the spectrum. So there are people whose mental health is benefited from working from home because they have a bit more flexibility around their work-life balance. Therefore, our hybrid way of working, where staff will be able to work for up to 50% of their time from home, will allow that to happen. But we do recognise that there is also importance to be in the office. Now, if you're at the other end, where you want to be in the office every day of the week, you can. We are not saying to anyone that you have to work from home. So if you are one of those people that needs to be in the office to get out of home, you are able to do that 5 days a week if you work 5 days a week.
Thank you. And what about flexibility in actual numbers of hours and shared job opportunities, that sort of thing?
So Councillor Rutter, for some years now, we've not had core hours. So it doesn't mean that people have to be working during set times, whilst clearly some departments have to be open during some times. So there has always been that flexibility in our working hours. So there hasn't been a change in that respect. I think that answers.
Thank you. It's good to hear the City Council is such a passionate employer.
Councillor Hurrell, did you have your hand up?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I did, lurking there. In the Appendix 2 notes from the meeting, we have the HSE percentage of 50% of sickness absence attributed to poor mental health, and our number of 45%. Do we have an objective as a council to improve that? Because I know obviously things in terms of absences flex and different things affect us all, but is that, although that 45 is sort of in line with HSE levels, do we have aspirations? Sorry, I'm talking away from the microphone to you, Mrs. Kirkman. Do we have aspirations to reduce that? And if so, what would we think is an improvement, as it were, in terms of the activities we've taken to try and enhance the work experience for our staff? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hurrell. And I think there's two aspects to the answer on that one. One is that no, we don't have a KPI that looks to seek to address a reduction in those percentages in respect of mental health issues, both personal and work related. And some of those, and I need to be careful not to breach confidentiality, so I'll speak very generally about this, but some of those reasons for personal stress can be a diagnosis at home, in which case there will need to be extended time off for that individual, and we would not seek to get that individual back to work until they were able to. That would be in support of our occupational health colleagues, as well as our mental health first aiders, any other support, counselling, for example, into place for that. So I wouldn't put a target on a reduction on that particular sickness level. What I can tell you that's happened in the last 2 years, if you forget how long COVID was on for, so I missed those. So in the last 2 years, the director team, so Dawn, Richard and myself, meet on a quarterly basis and review all sickness figures, because it's absolutely key that everyone that has been off sick has a return to work interview. And what we have sought to do is monitor the compliance and completion of those return to work interviews. And there's two reasons for that. One, it has been shown that return to work interviews do drive down the incidences of in an office, so that's good for the business. The second one is it's that opportunity to say, how are you? Are you feeling better? Is there anything we can do? So it's both that supportive conversation, but also that conversation that can drive down sickness. And we have seen that our overall sickness levels are below public sector average and are actually much closer to the private sector. So actually here at Winchester, we don't have a particularly big problem in terms of our sickness, thankfully.
Thank you.
Councillor Becker.
Thank you, and thanks to the group for such great and thorough work, and I'm pleased to see that the council is doing so well in this area, such that there's only one recommendation. So I was wondering if there's any way that we've captured ideas that didn't perhaps reach the level of needing to be a formal recommendation, but general things that we could improve.
Councillor Brooke, you might want to confirm that what I'm saying is correct, but there weren't any, Councillor Becker, anything that was captured. I have to say the response from our councillors on this group was absolutely positive. In the first session especially, it was like, we must be the gold standard. Can we benchmark ourselves to show how brilliant we are? And that was really lovely to hear, because especially during the pandemic, we'd just done our best. So it was lovely to get that feedback that actually our best was considered to be that good.
Amazing.
Is that fair?
That's absolutely fair. And I, at the time, was working as a social prescriber, so I was working with all sorts of people with various mental health issues, and had detailed conversations with many of them about the support they had from their workplace, and none of them even came close to what the council was doing. So we were incredibly impressed. So I had quite a high bar.
Amazing. Well, congratulations to the team. That's fantastic.
Councillor Krask.
Thank you, Chair, and just to echo the acknowledgement for the work that's been done in this extremely important area. I think for me particularly, in terms of the support that provide into the community, I think Appendix 4 for me does a nice job of laying out the grants, provide early intervention and support. Just wondering if there's any thoughts about what more we could do in terms of grants. Are opportunities we might explore. We've obviously got the town grants program. Interested in seeing if we could use some of that grants program to do more in the community, if that was seen as appropriate, if there are ideas where we might be able to do. Obviously the grants program doesn't level. I can imagine there are smaller areas perhaps that we might difference. Just keen to understand if there are. I don't imagine that we're doing everything we could and things are going to get worse and getting worse. Just wondering what else we could do, because we do have funds if we can.
Councillor Krask, I wouldn't know the in-depth detail of that, and particularly the Town Forum Grants programme, but if we take that away to look at that programme, I wouldn't know if it's fully subscribed every year, if there are already important organisations on that list, but certainly where health comes in, we can take that away and ask officers to have.
Councillor Krask, I also recall a discussion about 6 months ago about whether we should support with some grant funding mental health. It was a mental health organisation focusing on young women, or a mental health organisation focusing on young men, because I remember saying young men was incredibly underfunded. Mrs. Sadie, do you have any comments on that, or do you recall any such conversation?
I was writing my action from the Winchester Town Forum. I'm terribly sorry, Chair. Could you repeat the question?
I recall a discussion about investing, putting one of the grants towards mental health issues, because I recall a discussion about whether it would be put towards women's services or men's services, because women are higher users of the service. Because I remember making the point that the men's services are really underfunded and we need them to come forward more, because they are the most likely to commit suicide. Do you recall any such grant or conversation?
No, I'm sorry, I don't recall that specifically, but we are reviewing the grants and the criteria for the grants, which is why I was scribbling it down to make sure that we've considered this as a criteria. So going forward, that's something we would look at, and obviously agree with you with the criteria if we think that's a priority for our district.
Thank you. Councillor Cutler.
Yes, I was just quite intrigued by this map of vulnerability indexing, which isn't particularly easy to read, but it does look to me as if most of the grants are going to Winchester-based organisations, and yet there is a big block that is in the very high level of most vulnerable, as are quite a few of the rural areas. Just an area that's being missed.
We can take that back, Chair, and ask that specific team. I wouldn't be able to answer that this evening, Councillor Cutler.
Thank you, Councillor Cutler. Councillor Cook.
Thank you, Chair. Could I go back to page 16, and Appendix 2 refers to most recent staff survey, and then in brackets April 2021. I suppose my question will be, are we looking to survey again this year? And in addition to that, it refers to 95% of the staff said they knew how to seek help internally for their mental health. Was this actual survey completed? It refers to the people that did answer that survey, and 95% said this. what was the actual amount of staff that completed that survey? And maybe I've missed it somewhere in the report, and I apologise for that. But I suppose it goes back to, are we going to be doing another survey, and are we going to keep our finger on the pulse on this? Because I know personally that there are staff that are employed by Winchester City Council that are currently, one in particular is still not at work, one has just returned, and it hasn't been a good journey for them. Thank you.
Ms Taylor.
Thank you, Councillor Cook. Lisa and I will tag team on this answer. We regularly ask for staff views and attitudes in a range of measures, and Lisa will make reference to the particular survey you're talking to. But I just wanted to pick up on a staff survey that we did in June 22, because it really speaks to the piece around how people feel about being at work. And in this very short survey, for which 287 members of staff, that's about 50%, replied, one of the questions was, does my manager care about me? And the answer to that was 86% of staff agreed or strongly agreed. And that is an astoundingly good figure. And it's astoundingly good in June 22, because our colleagues have been working at home, as we all had, under incredible duress, as many organisations have for 2 years. And we worked really hard to make sure that we kept in touch with staff, because home isn't always a safe place for everyone. So we made sure that staff could come into the office if they wished to, if they preferred to, or if they needed to, and that we ensured that our managers had, we called them coffee conversations, where it wasn't an agendaed meeting, it was a Monday 9 o'clock, have a coffee, have a chat, just as you would if you were in the office. So we did that. And then there's another question in here, which is that, is my team supportive? And the answer to that is 92% that agreed or strongly agreed. And again, many of you remember the peer review that we did in 2017, and the overwhelming comments for staff were that we had a family feel and people liked working for Winchester and felt they belonged in Winchester. And again, June 22, we've managed to hold on to that with staff. And another question was, does the council take our health and well-being seriously? And Lisa and I will remember that just before the pandemic, we did a we did a Fitty Council exercise, which we're considering doing again, where we offered staff blood pressure checks and, like, you know, fruit and veg and all that, you know, sort of like a little bit of a health piece. And we had our director team having their blood pressure and cholesterol checked, which caused much amusement for teams on those pictures. But we do take it seriously. And 67% of staff recognise that as an agree or strongly agree. So a bit down on the other one, but similarly, you know, not a figure that I would be ashamed to say 67% is good. So we are confident that in an anonymous survey, staff feel supported at work. So that isn't the answer to your question, but I wanted to give you that context before Lisa answers the particular question you raised.
If I may say, I appreciate that what information you've just given me there, but I'd like to come back then to, you refer to a figure of 50% of the staff, 287. I'd like to know about the other 50%. I think we're missing something there, not through our own fault, but maybe we need to be more making it more attractive for them and make them want to, you know, engage in conversation with us about how they really feel. Thank you.
Yeah, yes, and I mean, clearly, different folk, we all know this, respond in different ways. And, you know, this was a straight survey with follow-ups to ensure response. 50% would be considered a great response for an organisational temperature check. But we do have other methods, and I'm sure Lisa and the team would have discussed that at the mental health wellbeing sessions, particularly with staff, which was around that we clearly have relationship with the Unison, who represents staff, but we also really importantly have a super proactive core team of staff who just beetle about the place and do great stuff to keep everyone up and buoyant. And one of our director team attends those meetings, and we get a temperature check there, you know? So it's kind of like you find different ways to get a sense of what's going on. But I can only quote a formal figure. You know, the culture of us is that we're around and we're available in the business. I had a conversation with a member of staff today who had suffering difficulties, personal difficulties. Happened to speak to the person, we sat and chatted for 20 minutes, you know. So we would all do that if someone was in need. But Lisa, you've got the other metrics.
Yes, I do, Laura. So, this note, the Appendix 2, Councillor Cook, was dated the 16th of February, so it wouldn't have referred to the recent staff attitude survey that was undertaken in June. Now, these were quite COVID-related staff temperature checks. So there was one done in the autumn of 2020, and we followed that up in April 2021. We were quite concerned after the initial survey. And I think we'll all remember this on that 4th of January when we went into that second lockdown. We were really concerned, actually, that our figures will have dipped quite heavily in how people were feeling. And the results in the April 2021 survey completely proved me completely wrong, because they had actually stayed the same or improved. So that was very positive. In respect of both of those surveys, their response rates were in the 60% for both of those. I can't give you the exact figure, Councillor Cook, off the top of my head now. 95% of staff was the response in April 21. It was 97% in 2020. I remember those because I was particularly pleased with them. And can I just say, there was a comment. We allow open comments because there might not be, you know, answering a question. Someone said, would you stop going on about mental health? I'm feeling really guilty because I feel fine. And it's like, I'm very happy to carry on talking about mental health and for that person to feel bad that they haven't got a mental health problem, because it was so important to keep getting that message across. So I actually had a member of staff complain that we were doing too much, but I was quite happy with that one. Helps.
Hold on, Councillor Cook, I just wanted to say something. When I was at university and we studied, I'm going back a long way, but we studied about doing surveys, and of course it depends on the type of survey you do, but a response of 18% or above was good, considered good in general, and that people are more likely to respond if they're disgruntled. So receiving a response that positive when people are more likely to respond if they're unhappy because they want to make their anonymous voices heard, I think is particularly encouraging. I would, while I'm interested in the 50% who don't reply also, I'd say that they're the ones who are pretty much fine, because if you're really happy or really, really angry or unhappy, then that's when you tend to reply.
Thank you for that, Chair, and thank you, Lisa and Laura. I think the last thing I'll say on this matter, it's comforting to hear that we have an open box where people can actually write what they really feel, because many times on a survey you are asked many questions and that not necessarily is how you really feel. So an open box, the bigger that box is, the better, because people do actually like to fill those things out. And it's got nothing to do with them having large writing, it's because of how they actually feel. Thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Smellish, I just wondered if you had any comments you'd like to make about the mental health support they're giving to the housing team, if you've had any feedback or any thoughts on that.
Thank you. No, we haven't. We appreciate everything that has been done by the housing team all the way through COVID. And to be honest, till I read the reports, I didn't realise how much they had done. So I'm actually quite pleased that I'm going to be able to take back what I'm learning today. Because, yeah, we have all appreciated it, but we just didn't know how much was being done. So thank you.
Thank you, that's really encouraging to hear. Thank you. Does anybody else have any other questions? Councillor Horrell.
Chair, this is more about the broader issue of well-being, and it does relate to our work with our tenants. And we hear much from the National Health Service that there are people in hospital who don't need to be there, they should be elsewhere. And there's a comment on page 19 of improving the support pathway out of hospital. And I've experienced in my own ward a couple of examples of people returning to their council home from hospital, but actually then the support that goes in around them is not always ideal. That's not necessarily all our responsibility, but that broader conversation. And I just wonder whether, reading this, whether there's a note to perhaps have a conversation with the portfolio holder for housing and the housing team as to whether our interventions as people return home to one of our properties from hospital, whether we are involved sufficiently in that, because we do have a lot of mechanisms to support people, but actually many tenants may not even realise that, as Lynn has perhaps just indicated. So it caught my eye as something that perhaps we should be addressing, not necessarily for this committee, but something perhaps we should refer back to the housing team. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I've made a note of that so they can take that away and speak to the team to see what we are doing for that. And if not, perhaps look into that. So we've had, I know some of you have put your debate at the start of your questions, but do we have any debate? No? Councillor Horrell.
Sorry, Chair, just to endorse the comments from other colleagues on the Scrutiny Committee that it's been a very helpful task and finish group to look at this matter, and perhaps indicative that this is a great way of working and that we should be doing more of this sort of thing. I think it's been helpful for us all to be reassured on what's being done and provide some data and evidence to ourselves and others in the room to share on the work that's being done. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think I've praised them quite enough times now, saying how fabulous they are, so I'm going to hold that this time. So the recommendation for scrutiny tonight was the work notes and recommendations of the task and finish group being noted by the Scrutiny Committee. So do we all feel that we're happy to note that and move on?
Agreed.
Thank you. So we're on to item 7, the Q1 finance and performance monitoring piece. The recommendation is on page 27. The performance monitoring group met as they always do. Councillor Horrell, can I pass over to you? I know Councillor Todger at the table as well. Would you like to come in once Councillor Horrell's given her introduction? Wonderful. Councillor Horrell, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, the sort of formula continues. The officers very kindly prepared all the Q1 documentation for us, and we submitted our questions in advance. A number of those were answered prior to the meeting, and indeed some were augmented in the session on the 22nd of August. There are clearly on the minutes that have been shared with you this evening some follow-up actions that are still due to be shared with the panel. Some questions that weren't able to be answered immediately. Probably though, Chair, the item that I think captured all of us on the panel particularly is to understand whether the review of our risk at this time as a council, as it pertains to many of our budgets and activities and aspirations projects right across the piece, are being sufficiently addressed, and are they visible I think we did that in a positive sense of actually trying to understand whether all our actions that are in place are sufficient with our various funds that have been put aside, whether they are sufficient given that we're going into such a period of unknown activity. So the suggestion is that Councillor Cutler, who obviously has extensive finance experience in the administration, yourself, Chair, and myself as the Chair of the panel, discuss how we look at our understanding of the risks that we have before us, not just the register, but the risks before us as a council, and whether we have appropriate provision in place. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Horrell. Councillor Cutler, you just wanted to briefly say something on that.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to what Councillor Horrell said. I mean, it was raised in the Audit and Governance Committee that we were going through a period where new risks were emerging, and there was some discussion about where it was most appropriate to scrutinise that. Now, the Audit and Governance Committee have a pretty close look at the risk register on a regular basis, and I'm confident that we will be able to scrutinise it to a good enough extent. But I just wanted to raise it really with the performance panel and with the scrutiny committee as an area that we all ought to be paying attention to, I think. And so I think we'll have the discussion and papers will come to audit and governance. If there is a requirement for some extra look at it, either by the performance panel or by the scrutiny committee, that's appropriate. It's a matter of having a good look at it, see where we are.
Thank you, Councillor Cutler. Councillor Todd.
Thank you, Chair, very much indeed for the opportunity to comment. And as you rightly say, a great deal of work goes into this. Ultimately, it's a paper for Cabinet. It's a very important paper for Cabinet. We spend, I certainly spend time with my colleagues looking very closely at what's in there. And we do value the extra scrutiny attention that it gets from the performance panel and from this committee. You know, it's in no one's interests that we miss things or don't properly address issues that are raised, and the work that you do to go through it in detail, alongside the work that goes on in the background to go through it in detail, is much appreciated. I'm really pleased to hear that both the Scrutiny Committee and the Audit and Governance Committee will be taking a look at risk and the implications of the uncertain times that we have at the moment. Certainly the issues that we're facing at the moment, both as an organisation ourselves in terms of inflation in particular, economic uncertainty, some degree of political change and uncertainty that we need to be thinking about, because we do not know, for example, what the agenda of the new Secretary of State for local government is likely to be, is an important one. And I think knowing that that your committees will be looking at that risk register, our risk profile, our risk registers, is reassuring. It is something I always find incredibly important on any of the projects and areas that I'm responsible for. I think candor in understanding the risks you face and also ensuring that adequate plans are put in place to address them is incredibly important. And I know that it's something that's extremely important to the Executive Leadership Board, the directors of and Chief Executive of the Council, and which they also take extremely seriously. So I look forward to hearing the output and the outcome of the work of Audit and Governance and any further work that you do on this. I can assure you that in any case, we are not just taking the extra risks that we face as a result of current circumstances very seriously, but indeed looking at the impacts of inflation and energy prices on our own operations, residents, on businesses, and making sure that the consequences of that are thought through that might be needed. You'll be seeing that as we come forward. You will see, hopefully, outcome of that work and outcome of that consideration of risk issues reflected in budget papers and the like as we go forward. In particular, in the medium-term financial strategy, where obviously we are facing a lot of different pressures and changes, and that is a particular area where understanding the risks and being prepared for the risks is something that's getting a lot of focus.
Thank you, Councillor Todd. Does anybody have any questions on this report? Performance panel? No. It just occurred to me, sorry, skipping backwards, I hadn't read to you from the mental health matters my key points that I was taking away for you to agree them. So apologies. So if you can cast your mind back just a moment. It was, are there any grants for mental health? Dawn AD to look at whether we're currently giving grants, as Councillor Brooke thinks, and to look for future opportunities. The vulnerability map looks like we have a bigger issue in Southwark, Denmead and rural areas. Are we missing something? Lisa Kirkman to have a look at that. And what support do we give to those returning from hospital in our housing environments? Everything? Fabulous.
Agreed.
Right. Now back into the time zone that we'd already moved into. So we have no questions on the finance paper. Do we have any debate on the finance? No? Okay. In that case, our recommendation was on page 27. Said, click to it. That we note the performance panel met on the 22nd of August, scrutinised the attached report, CAB 3361 and the associated appendices. The minutes of the panel's meetings are included as appendix to the Cabinet report. We note that the chairperson of the performance panel has provided a verbal update and raises any leader or relevant Cabinet member any issues from that report, which of course we've heard is the risk register, and Councillor Horrell, Councillor Cutler and I will meet to discuss that. And also, I'm not sure if we'd just like that between three of us or if we'd appreciate Ms Kirkman and Ms Taylor in the room.
It probably would be appropriate to have Simon Howson, wouldn't it? In the room.
Perhaps we can just take away the appropriate officers.
Okay. Thank you. I shall note down appropriate officer support. So with that recommendation, are we happy to note that we've done all we needed to do and we're happy with this report?
Agreed.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, coming on to the work programme. So our next meeting is an all-day meeting, as you'll all be aware, on the 22nd of September, where we are inviting as a scrutiny committee the local plan advisory group to join us in scrutinising the local plan. I've spoken to officers to look at the format of the meeting, the agenda, how we can utilise the public and member contributions best, how the committee and advisory group can feed its findings into the Cabinet decision, and further information will come out to you about this shortly. So it will be a long day. We have agreed that although the timetable is for 8 hours, we've accepted it's a really important thing. It may overrun. So I just want to note now to you, please do bring some food with you and sustenance for the day, because we may well need it. We're going to be exhausted, I'd imagine, by the end of the day. I also wanted to note that we have an additional meeting in January to receive a report on station approach that we discussed last time that we'd like to put in. So we've moved the community safety item from March to February. The main reason for moving it from March to February is John Turton, who always comes and gives us the reports, retires. And we would really like him to come along before he retires, rather than missing him after he's gone. So that's the main reason for bringing that forward. So I hope you'll indulge me and accept that that's a very good reason for bringing that meeting forward. And we also have an update regarding Central Winchester regeneration in March, and the date for that will be confirmed. So with that noted, is everybody happy to note the work programme and any questions? Councillor Becker.
Just to note the difficulties of an all-day meeting for those of us who work. I know, Councillor Brooke, you're in exactly the same position, and with child, school drop-offs, pickups, it's going to be almost impossible. So it's just noting that, and noting that for those who feel that they want to come and participate, working people will find that really difficult. So if we can be very flexible in the way that we can accept contributions to that meeting, that would be really.
Thank you, Councillor Becker. We will discuss whether there are opportunities to contribute remotely in any way, but also whether members may be excused for childcare purposes and the like. I understand challenges. My day's holiday is certainly not a day's holiday. So thank you for that. Councillor Horrell.
Chair, the points made about the all-day meeting are perfectly valid, but of course this is a hugely important document for the council, and the first time that we've all had a chance to look at it in full. Am I able to inquire, please, because there are sort of two parts to this. Clearly, policies, which are hugely important, and the detail of that may be significant, and then obviously the sites. And we want to give due consideration to both elements of that, and probably ensure that we give any feedback on the policies in as detailed a fashion as we can. Are we going to break down the days so that, perhaps to Councillor Becker's point, if you've got a comment on, certain policies, they'll be on the agenda at a certain time and you can appear and speak. If you're not a member of the committee, if you're a councillor registering to speak, you could go away, come back later in the day. Are we going to break it down into sort of bite-sized pieces, or are we just having a session for councillors to give their views in sort of en masse, as it were, as per the public session? I'm just looking to see how we can make this as helpful as possible for the broadest audience to participate. Thank you.
Ms. Sadie, you had some thoughts on the best way to break it down. Would you like to discuss those?
Thank you. Thank you very much. We're currently approaching it in the morning and the afternoon session, being the two split sessions. So and thank you for the Chair's acceptance on holding it in an unusual way. We're taking the policies in the morning, and we'll take a questions session, a public session in the morning, and then the allocations in the afternoon, and again take a separate questions session, a public session then. So we've got two opportunities for a morning and an afternoon. We are advising Chair on how we can group the policies so we can approach them in the morning. We could put times on those, but that would then limit your times, and you wouldn't be able to extend those if you felt you hadn't exhausted the topic. So at the moment, we're aiming at morning and afternoon, but point taken on flexibility on how you might therefore contribute, and whether we can take written statements as part of the public attendance. So I'll discuss that with our monitoring officer and the Chair, and we'll do our best to make it as flexible as possible.
We'd already discussed as a group that when we had our pre-discussion, that part of that judgment call on how we would take comments and feedback and the public sessions and things, how long they'd be once the closing time has passed for registering to speak as well. So we will definitely follow that up at that point. Councillor Horrell.
Could I just ask Mrs. Adey for a couple of points of clarification then? If you're a councillor not on LPAG or Scrutiny, you'll get one chance in the morning to ask questions about any policy. That's it, is it? So if you've got comments on 3 or 4 policies, you just get one slot to speak. Is that how you intend to run it? Just so I can be clear. Thank you.
That's right. That's the current intention. We've got a lot to cover, as Councillor Brooks said. So we've referred back to the Constitution to make sure we're following what's fair in the Constitution. We're going to see how many people register to speak, and then speak to Chair to see how best to manage that, to make sure we give everyone as much opportunity as we can, but equally don't use the whole day for public speaking and therefore not have time for debate. So yeah, it's a flexible approach.
Chair, could I just ask one other point of clarification? I know I asked this question of Councillor Todd the other day. How, if the meeting of Scrutiny, as we do in normal session, come up with some recommendations for Cabinet, how are they going to be processed? I know you're on a very tight timetable, so appreciate that. How are they going to be processed? Are they going to be passed as notes of the meeting with recommendations? How is that going to be most usefully provided to Cabinet so that they can actually do something with that given the time constraints? Thank you.
So we'll take the route we've taken with our major applications that major developments that we've dealt with recently. So we'll take your points and put them through in the Cabinet paper as raised by ONS. And so the Cabinet paper will reflect whether that point was agreed and the papers were adjusted, not agreed and why it was not agreed, or what else might happen to it. So it will come forward as a list with whether we adjusted the papers or whether we didn't, and for what reason we didn't going forward. So there is time for us to do that. The scrutiny is whether the papers are appropriate for the council to consult on these documents. So some of the feedback might be in-depth views on the content of the documents, and we have to work very carefully with Chair to make sure we've got the right items listed, so we can say whether they're appropriate for the consultation or whether they're actually part of the consultation and will happen later.
Does that answer the question, Councillor?
Very helpful, thank you, and yes, appreciate that. And one other element, which obviously is new for this plan, which is the whole question of viability, which of course, if there's a particularly strong point, may throw that question into debate. How are we going, or do you have a plan or a view on how that would be managed if there's something of significance? Or is that the sort of thing that would go into the consultation pot for further review as part of that Reg 18 process for a revision post that particular step in the plan making? Thank you.
So you're right to indicate it's likely to be discussed. So if it's a policy point, it's likely to be discussed as part of the onward consultation, because that's what you're consulting on, whether your policy is correct or not. And that's what's up for debate in the Regulation 18. Should LPAG or ONS find a technical point in our papers that actually is a showstopper, is something that's not correct technically, then we can't proceed, because we wouldn't be recommending that to Cabinet, and we would have to correct that and move the dates forward so we could correct that. So hopefully we don't have that scenario, but of course if something did crop up that was technically not correct, then we would have to deal with that.
Thank you.
Councillor Krask.
Thank you, Chair. This is my first local plan round, so I don't necessarily understand everything. But looking at the invite emails, what are we scrutinising? The suggestion is we're scrutinising the consultation Reg 18 local. Are we scrutinising the process by which going to be presentation of the plan? Say how the plan is going to be shared and commented. Is what it suggests in what else? Or are we scrutinising the local plan itself, but then local plan presentation doesn't open? Remember, is the local plan going to be reread? Or what we're actually doing on that date? Thank you.
You will have the full draft regulation 18 local plan to look at, so you will have all 400 pages in its full glory to review. You're scrutinising and do, if I can ask Mrs. Kirkman to step in if I need some support here. You're scrutinising whether this is an appropriate policy for Cabinet to consider. So you're scrutinising whether we've got the approach to the policy correct. And that's what I did say that a minute ago. We're going to have to carefully manage on the day whether a point that might be raised is someone's view that should be placed in the consultation, or is actually a view that the council is not an appropriate policy for the council to be consulted on. And that, so you do look in the policies, you do form a view, you can voice that view, but your exam question on the day is going to be, does that make that a not appropriate policy for the council to be consulting on, or is it an appropriate policy? Mrs. Kirkman, have I summarised that correctly?
Thank you, Mrs. Adey. Yes, you are. This will be the Cabinet paper which will authorise the consultation for the Regulation 18, and it is for Scrutiny to scrutinise that decision. So it's not a decision to adopt that plan. It's not a decision to finalise those policies. Are those policies the ones that Scrutiny thinks should go out for consultation or not? And what's really important about the meeting is how we capture the comments, both from LPAG and Scrutiny members, in terms of comments on those policies. That's what officers are spending a significant amount of time thinking over, and that's why the member briefing is quite important, so that when people come to the table, all members understand what that process is and what will be happening on that day. So I hope.
But thank you. Sorry, you need to do it in layman's terms for me. Right. So there might be a policy which might say every new development has to have a heat pump. I just made that up. But so that's the policy. We get to say, don't get to say whether we agree with that policy. We get to say whether that policy is appropriate to be in the local plan. How do we know if it's appropriate to be in the local?
It's a good question, and it is a tricky subject for us to cover. So using your example, if we'd written a policy that said every new home had to have a heat pump, and that made building homes in Winchester district unaffordable, the reports would tell you that, because we also have the affordability laid out in front of us. So you would see that it's unaffordable. We might have put that forward. So you could then, and again, I'm looking to Mrs. Kirkman to correct me if I'm wrong, but you could then say that's not an appropriate policy because it's not affordable and would stop housing development in Winchester. I don't think that's what we should. But if the policy for a heat pump for every house said it was an affordable policy, again, the affordability will show you that, then it would be more your opinion that policy could be reshaped, and that would be part of the consultation. That's why we've got to carefully listen to your questions on the day to understand your points, to make sure we've got them in the right place as to how we take them. It's
going to be very hard for me to separate. I think heat pump is a good idea as a policy. Appropriate to be in there.
Councillor Crusk, if I may, it's not for you to decide whether you're commenting in a consultation way or in a constructive, I absolutely don't think you're approaching it correctly. The officers will then take away our comments and feedback from scrutiny, and they will figure out where it most appropriately sits. So the briefing, the pre-brief, it's really important we're on that, because it will talk about the new plan and how that relates or replaces parts of the old plan. So it's really important that all of us that are at that scrutiny committee or on LPAG attend that briefing, because otherwise we will be quite confused probably when it comes to the scrutiny at LPAG meeting. But it's not for you to decide, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. Does that help?
It does. Thank you very much for indulging me with my questions. It will be recorded.
Thank you, Chair. Several points. One is, are we all going to get a printed copy so that we've got something in front of us that we mark up a lot easier? We find that a lot easier in planning committee. The second point is, when will we get the reports? Because the planning committee came up at that time, which we've already been notified is going to be a very heavy meeting. Also, will the planning committee be involved in this local plan? People that actually implement it.
So I know that the planning committee did have a meeting with Adrian Fox and co in advance of that to discuss policies. So they have already fed into this process so far. With regard to the printed copies,
there are no current plans for us to print copies. It's quite a large document, and that would use a significant amount of resources. However, if anyone has a need for a printed copy on the day, I'll speak to the team to see if we can get one done as individuals request, but not as a blanket.
If we request one, can we have one a few days before?
Yes.
and Councillor Laming also asked when we will receive this, because they also have a heavy planning workload.
So this will come out with the normal schedule of publishing for cabinet. For scrutiny. Thank you very much. It's been a long day. So you'll receive it on Wednesday, the 15th. In term 14th. Thank you.
All right. Yeah, it's a question of when the planning committee is. I can't remember when that is offhand. Sorry. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Rutter.
Thank you, Chair. Can I'm going to assume that, and I know Adrian's completely on top of all this, but we do have a new Prime Minister and a new cabinet, and God knows what behind the scenes. But government regulation obviously trumps all our decisions about planning and the local plan. So presumably, what we're being presented with as the draft local plan will be as up to date as possible given current regulation. And that's what I'm assuming, and therefore options within it are options that we can decide on. Am I right in thinking that? That's all I wanted to double. I was sure that that will be the case, but I double check. Thank you.
Councillor Cutler.
I think this discussion sort of really proves the point that there is the potential for it to be a terribly long meeting. But if it's tightened around, it will be consulted on. There'll be plenty more opportunity to express comments on the policies. So I think that whole point about what's important are these, sort of technically right is the key. And I think that's a fair challenge to be able to chair that meeting and keep it tight. But I'm sure you'll be able to do it.
Thank you for the vote of confidence, Councillor Cutler. It's much appreciated. Councillor Horrell.
Chair, it's been helpful to clarify the points about policy, and it's absolutely correct that could just be fed into the broader consultation as appropriate. So that's clear to me. We don't know yet, or certain people do, but the broader councillor community do not know the sites being put forward for development, and there may be many that we agree on, and there may be some that we do have significant concerns about based on various criteria. So could Mrs. Adey help us understand how we're going to comment on sites? So if we feel there's an infrastructure issue, some other element that hasn't been considered, settlement hierarchy differences, whatever they might be, how might we have that conversation on the 22nd? Thank you.
Thank you. If you're talking about a site that's in the plan, then that's a regulating 18 consultation point that we'll be talking about. If you feel we've missed a site or excluded a site that technically we shouldn't have, that should be debated on the day of ONS.
So even if we think the data on which a site has been included is based on inaccurate information, and I'm not saying there is, but we've discussed a site that we think is highly inappropriate. I don't know whether it's in or out because of infrastructure issues, and we know that going into the consultation. Are you saying it would still stay in the consultation?
If there's a technical reason that you think's been missed, I think that would be discussed at ONS and then put forward and decided by the officers as described by Chair. You could bring a technical point forwards, but not your political view at that time. That's for the Reg 18.
But this is absolutely on the technical assessment of the site for whatever reason. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions on that? As I say, more details on how it will run will come out, will be issued to you in advance of the day. So, and we are reconvening once we know how many speakers we have registered. So, thank you for that. So, are we happy to note the work programme? Councillor Horrell?
Sorry, Chair, I just have one other question, just to clarify where it's coming up. We've had a really interesting discussion this week with the panel set up to look at allowances and subsistence and the like, and actually they were very good conversations. Any changes to that, will they be rolled into the budget discussions that we'll have in November? Just to clarify, thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I was just asking. Rain was going to come in through the end windows. I was just aware that Councillor Cutler's beneath one of them.
May I, if I can just help with the comment on members' allowances, there is a regulated process where a report has to be considered by full council with respect to any proposals for a change to members of allowance. I'm not familiar with the timescale as I sit here tonight on that, but we would obviously be able to accommodate any changes in the budget if that was members' wish.
Sorry, Chief Executive, I can help with that one. The timetable does allow for the budget setting process for 23-24 to take into account any changes very deliberately, and I believe that the interviews do take place in September and October. That's quite imminent.
Thank you. So with all of that discussed, we note the work programme and move on to the last item on our agenda, item 9, the latest forward plan of key decisions. Does anybody have any comments on this? Any questions? Any debate? No. Okay, so let's all agree that we've noted that then, and I shall close the meeting. It is now currently 7:40. Thank you for your engagement this evening, and I shall see you all on the 22nd, and we'll all have a lovely day with a picnic.